Sweet. So we're going to set up a new project. One of the things I want to pay attention to is that you guys can go and actually select your minimum SDK version, and one of the things that you will see is the percentage of devices that you're going to support on the Play Store. So based off of the projects that you're doing, make sure to refer to this. It's a quick hint. So let's create a new activity. Finish. So we're going to go over two of the more advanced things in assignment 1 that they were bonuses, but we do want to encourage you guys to use them, for projects for assignment 2, assignment 3, and hopefully for your demo as well. The first is Butterknife. So who used Butterknife in their project? A few of you guys. Okay, so can one of you describe what Butterknife is?
It's automatically by rerouting of the layout into the activities. So you don't need to call find by activity.
Right, exactly. So as I described last time over assignment or lab, find by view by ID is extremely expensive. So, but also you have to write that a lot of times, especially if you're trying to link something up to your activity. So what Butterknife does is it removes that boilerplate code. So let's just go and set that up really quick. So let's see if I can find Butterknife. All right, Butterknife, sweet. So what we do is we basically just copy these two in. So one is the Maven project, the other is the annotation processor. We will talk about that in a sec. So we basically open up our Gradle and copy that in. Cool. We sync. And then if we look at activity main, we can add an ID, let's say, let's call it text view. Okay. So then instead of writing find view by ID, what we can use is the bind view annotation. We can use our resource ID. It has to be protected. And this is a text view. I need to change. Okay. And then in your onCreate, you have to call Butterknife bind, and then the activity. All right. And then afterwards, you can change the text. So currently it says hello world. Says welcome to class 2. Okay, and let's run this. So you guys can imagine as this becomes more complicated and you guys have a lot of IDs, instead of having to go to onCreate and map them one at a time to your member variables, you can simply use the annotation. So how many of you know how this works though? So do you guys know what an annotation is? And what it's used for? Does anyone have a guess? Okay, sure.
When we call Butterknife this activity,
Mm-hmm.
we sign up or register into the Butterknife system, and then when they come, they will check back up, they will check this activity that has registered as annotation, and if they have, they get the ID, and the Butterknife will compare them with
So yes, do you know what property of Java it uses to accomplish this? Does anyone know? Those who use Butterknife? Actually, for some reason that didn't work. Let me check that.
dependency injection.
No. No. Right. So annotation processing, but there's a few ways to use annotation processing. But there's something more concrete on how Java applications run. So there's a few ways to go and re-inspect your code. So how many people have heard of reflection? Reflection? Okay, so reflection is, so basically you have this class hierarchy, right? You have, like if I, for example, look at main activity, it extends fragment activity, so on and so forth. So what reflection allows you to do is go and look back into your code during runtime and actually like change your code. It's almost like self-modifying your code sometimes. So if you guys aren't that familiar with it, I won't dive into it too deep, but it's actually a really powerful thing about Java is that you can actually call a method. I could literally say like main activity class and then like get like annotation, and this will run during runtime. So basically it will execute, like I can go in and re-inspect my my class hierarchy. I can actually go and look at the classes and actually run functions within the class. But the other portion of Java, of course, is the compiled language, right? So Java gets compiled into what? Does anyone know? Bytecode, exactly. So there's two places where you can hook in to do like annotation processing. One, of course, is runtime. You can simply say, I want to look at, like this butter knife bind, you can say, I want to find anything with a bind view annotation and like do this binding. So that's not what it does, because that would be super, super slow, right? Because now you're running this, remember how like I described the layout and how find view by ID is very slow because you have to traverse the entire tree to find your exact ID? Well, it's a similar thing for if I were to run reflection here. I would literally say traverse your entire code and find like this specific method and run it. So instead, if we actually go look at that Gradle file, we see this annotation processor, right? This annotation processor is saying, please go and generate code during compile time. So during compile time, it will actually go and look at this code, inspect it, find the annotations, and then generate the code. So you're not doing inspection on runtime. So it's a lot faster. Does that make sense? So a lot of times there's a lot of magic that happens when we start introducing things like annotations and dependency injection and all these various libraries. We got to be, it either happens in reflection or it happens in compile time, and in this case it happens in compile time, and we go and actually generate this code. I know I'm going to be moving a little fast. Don't worry, like everything will be, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask me at any time, and then of course these videos will go up. Cool. So how many of you, raise of hands, use data binding? Data binding, a few of you. Okay, cool. So let's go over some data binding stuff. So what we're going to do right now is we're simply going to remove butter knife, get rid of butter knife and all that stuff. So can one of you describe data binding really quick that used it? Daniel?
Yes, it's kind of similar to butter knife, but what you have to do is to mark layout files with a tag called layout.
Mm-hmm.
And then at compile time, the framework will produce or generate a new class.
Mm-hmm.
This class contains variables to all the elements of this layout, something like this.
Correct. So how many of you have used other languages or templating languages such as, I don't know, handlebars or all these other things where you can basically specify in your XML like how data gets mapped into a specific field? So as of right now, what we see within our activity.main is that we see this text, right? It says hello world. It's like a string mapping. But most of the times we want it dynamic, right? We want to map it to something in code or some object in code. What data binding allows us to do is take this object and map it. So whenever that changes or that value changes, it will get reflected here in the text view. So does anyone have any questions regarding that? This might be a little fast, but it's okay? Okay, cool. And then this we will reflect back as to how it's different from Butterknife. And so we can talk about that a little bit more. Sweet. So if we go through data binding, one of the things that we're going to have to add is this parameter in our Gradle file, or this setting in our Gradle file. Okay, we can add it here. All right, and then what that changes is that within every single layout, or every single layout file, we no longer can, actually I'm just going to create a new one. Resource, so let's say activity data binding. Bad name, but okay for now. And I'm going to drop 3 text views inside. Okay, sweet. So then if I take a look at this, currently we have this like linear layout set up, right? But in order to do data binding, we have to add an extra wrapper that says outside of here that says layout. And you can see that here. There's an entire, of course, setup page on how to use data binding, but we basically add this layout wrapper. Sorry, that's and what I'm going to do really quick is actually create some packages. So I'm going to create activity package. And this is just for organization purposes. Activity model. View model. Let's see. And we will change this to activity that what's going on here? Go break something. Something break? Yeah, just something. Strange, interesting. Nope, that's R. Oh, strange. R is not being regenerated right now.
Go to the
Go to what?
go to the
Oh, here?
you need to delete the exam.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's correct. Yes, that's correct. Because it's already been removed. That's strange. That shouldn't have caused R not to be regenerated. And now this package is RSA. Okay. Layout that. Nope, still not being regenerated. Strange.
Try to clean the the project.
Alright, we'll see if Gradle rebuilds. Yeah, so this is one of the things that is gimmicky about Android Studio is that it will try to rebuild stuff. If things are out of sync, you won't get your R, and yeah, sometimes you just close and restart and then start working. But fortunately, that's not the case. Okay.
This work.
No.
Oh wait,
You just start.
he actually tell you to implement the class.
What's going on? Alright, I'm going to close Android Studio and I'm going to restart. Okay. Sorry, guys. Oh, man. So while it's restarting, how many of you guys have heard of MVC, Model View Controller? Can anyone describe the general concept behind MVC?
It's a training for and the view will actually what the user project is, and the controller will control what I mean the model will store the data and any entity, and controller will decide which model is passed to the view.
Correct. So it's a general overall principle, and then inside of it, there's three main concrete versions of MVC. One is Model View Presenter. One is actually called MVC, which is actually where the view can talk. Actually, I'll bring it up. MVC, yes, MVP. Okay. Okay, sweet. A link that I had already clicked on. So you can see that there's three different types of MVCs. This is like the more traditional one, right? A controller can talk to a model can talk back to a view, and a view can talk back to the controller. What we've worked with so far is actually much more along the lines of MVP. So the model never talks back with the view, and presenter is very, very heavy, right? It controls almost everything. So what we're going to show you with data binding is that you can actually implement MVVM, which is just a whole new way of thinking about model view control, and it's pretty heavyweight, and it might not always benefit you guys, but we'll see if we can get it to work with our generates. All right, I have no idea what's going on. Let's see if I can resync data. I'll take this out really quick. See if I can get it to compile again. Sorry, what was that? Just create a new project? Okay. It worked? Okay. Alright, I'm just going to create a new project. The joys of Android Studio. Sorry. Alright. Demo 3. We'll call it Demo 3. Alright. Empty project. Cool. So just out of curiosity, those who used data binding, why did you guys decide to use data binding? Who used data binding again? Can you guys raise your hand? Two of you guys? Why did you guys choose to use data binding?
Thing is that you can specify something. I mean, in the view, if the data was named or something like blank, you can set that, create a view and add it.
Right, and you can basically, without having to programmatically specify every single time, correct? Okay. So let's go and take a look at that. We'll create a new layout again. Well, and we'll refine this to activity. Okay, and we'll run. Okay, so in the meantime, I want to get all this data binding stuff set up again. And so, okay, so it ran. And let's see if it runs data binding. Okay, sweet. So the other thing about MVP, the reason why MVP is used is because everything is sort of loosely coupled, right? So as you could see, like when we were using Butterknife, you didn't have that binding between your specific like list view or your specific text view to your presenter. You set up those bindings yourself. So MVVM basically reinforces this binding. It says that you must follow this binding. And so what happens as a result of that is it changes sort of how you program, it changes the paradigm, and it enforces exactly what you're talking about. You have to clearly set up a model. You clearly have to like set up this binding between your view model and your view to represent state, and we'll see that in a little bit. Okay, so let's see if that works. So I'm going to delete this. I am going to add the layout. Take this from here. Okay, so as right now, we are not doing any binding whatsoever, but we're just conforming to what is a requirement for data binding, and we will run. So it's done. Okay, did that work? Okay, so it worked. Okay, so now we're actually going to do the data binding. So I'm going to create like a user model. In here we'll have first name, last name, and let's say gender. Okay? And then we will we'll implement getters and setters, so these three. Okay, sweet. So now what you can do is, okay, so now what you can basically do is go in here and create a binding. So you can say we have a piece of data, and similar as you can see in this document, you can specify a variable, and you can map a specific name to a specific type. Name, we'll call it user, and in this case, com. And now this user variable can now be reused, right? So for your text, instead of saying text view, oh my gosh, it needs to show up. So now you can basically specify like user, first name, user, last name, and so on and so forth. Let's go ahead and do that. It's not generating, okay. What's going on? Yeah, this is not correct. Oh, that's going to be the strings. Nope. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so. Sweet. Now in your main activity, what you want to do is actually set this up, right? So you take the data binding utility, you set the context view. So previously you had the set content view here. And then what you'll do is you call, sorry, what was the parameters? I think it was activity this. And then our layout activity DB. Sweet, and this actually returns, so do you see how this is called activity DB? This should be generated now, so we should see a new type called activity DB binding. So this is actually generated for you now. And then now in your binding, you'll see you have a set user. So what happens is by adding that parameter in the Gradle file, it will base that in this Gradle file by adding this this line in, or this instruction in. It will take this activity, inspect it, and then generate this binding for it. So now it's expecting a user, right? So what we can do is now we can say, let's generate a constructor where we have all three, and then I can create a user. So my name is Christopher Kong, and I am Amit. Let's see. Oh, that's right. So did you guys see how that worked? So basically took everything that was in this user and basically remapped it straight into your XML. So now your XML, you can actually specify a binding. So, but this is not a true MVVM. So what you'll see is that what they actually expect you to do is to create a user view model. So a user view model extends base observable. Because the thing right now, what happens is, let's say I were to change this user, it wouldn't know to go and rebind and re-update that UI, right? So now, as you can see, this is a very, very tight binding. You have to literally, for this view model, I have to call in my constructor, I will actually take the user this user equals user, and then what I will do is also create these setters, right? So similar to this user, I will take all these getters and setters in here, and then I'll call user get first name, user set first name. But here's the key, is that now you actually have to notify, you have to basically tell the binder that there's a notification that something has changed. And so what you'll, in this documentation, if you actually scroll down and you look up bindable, you can see that every single time you call set first name, it'll call notify. And this BR object, again, is generated. So you're basically creating this circular loop where it says, if something changes in my view model, please notify like the binder, and then it will rebind the UI and then make the changes. So now you have this closed loop, right? So you can clearly specify that you can even create complex relationships. For example, you can say if it's equal to male, the checked box is on, right? You can create in your view model like is checked parameter, and that is now binded to like a checkbox, for example. Does that make sense, everyone? So you want to close this loop. I don't know if the way you guys use data binding, was it to this level or was it just like one way? One way, exactly. So that's powerful if you want. So some of you guys have used React, but if you actually want to trigger something that changes the model somehow. But if you want to set up like MVVM, you need a two-way binding. And so you have to write a lot of boilerplate code to get there. Is that clear for everyone? So again, there is no right trade-off. You guys should choose between MVP, MVVM, or MVC. MVC is actually great, for example, for a spreadsheet because you want the view to basically notify whenever anything changes, but that's way too complex. But again, per activity, you guys want to select appropriately. Cool. Is that all good? All right, sweet. Yeah, so again, MVP is great for very generic purposes and very loosely coupled, so you have a lot of flexibility. It becomes very complicated if so MVVM is great if your logic is very simple. Like for example, is checked is if the string is equal to male, right? Or equal to female. But if that piece of code becomes really, really big, you don't want to like set up all this stuff just for that, right? Like it's easier to have a more flexible structure so that you can not have this strong binding between your view and your view model. Right now it says, okay, you have your view and your view model. Your view model represents the state of the view. You can imagine something that's not like that, right? So a form is a perfect example to use like MVVM because you have a lot of different things. As some people type, you want that reflected in, or make changes, you want that reflected in your view model. and you want any changes to that view model to be reflected back to the view. It's not the case if, for example, someone's just clicking a button and you want it to perform some sort of network like action, like doing that setup is just overkill. So you want to minimize the amount of work that you're doing for the value that you're getting. Does that make sense? So like a form, you can imagine you can have like 20 field items. That would make sense. But for something that just requires just a button click that goes and does something over the network, setting up that entire MVVM is not necessary. Cool.